Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We were delighted to see so many of you sign up for this webinar on how to maximise your buy-to-let rental yields. Really lovely to have you join us today. So look, when we were thinking about running our next webinar and really trying to consider something that was going to bring real value to people, what we're very, very aware of at the moment is that landlords are feeling increasingly squeezed in terms of cash flow. So yes, rental incomes, rental yields are increasing. There's no two ways about that. And we're seeing this reported all over the place, circa 10% last year, predictions of between 5 and 10% this year. And that continues for the coming years as well. So actually, in terms of yields on properties, things are looking very good. But are these yields, increasing yields, going to be sufficient to balance out the other increased costs that sit around having a buy-to-let property? So higher tax for those of you who are running as individuals, not as companies. In higher borrowing costs, there's no two ways about it. Mortgage interest rates have increased. For those of you who are on long-standing fixed rates, fantastic. But for a lot of you, at some point, those fixed rates will end or have already ended, or you're already on a tracker. And so your borrowing costs would have escalated. So actually, what we thought would be really useful is just to bring you some ideas about how you can look to maximise the yield on your buy-to-let properties. Now, before we go any further, I just want to take a couple of moments to introduce myself for those of you who don't know me. So I'm the sales director here at Mortgages for Business. I've been with the company, 16, 17, they all start to blur in a really long time. And during my stint at Mortgages for Business, I have placed thousands and thousands of mortgages. I have the qualifications after my name that I think is only right that you'd expect that I would have. And I think also, as importantly as the mortgage knowledge that I have, I'm also a landlord myself. So when I'm talking to you and we're talking about challenges and difficulties and concerns, these are the sort of feelings that I share with you because I'm also in the same boat. Mortgages for Business, we're a whole of market mortgage brokerage. We have offices in 2 locations, one in Wilmslow in Cheshire and our main office, our head office here in West Malling in Kent. We've been around since the 90s, and you know what, honestly, I'm not embarrassed actually or ashamed to really blow our trumpet. We are really, really brilliant at what we do. We focus predominantly on residential investments and buy-to-lets, and that can be for individuals or limited companies, but we do all types of first charge lending, so commercial investment, commercial owner-occupier, homeowner mortgages, bridging finance, development finance. So anything where there's a first charge on a property in the UK, we can help you with that, and we're very, very good at it. Now, that's enough about us. That's the kind of unashamed plug. Moving on to the agenda for this webinar. So we're going to be talking about top property types, regional hotspots, and then how you can really look to also optimise your current investments. There's some really, really great things which will hopefully really help you to start to maximise on rental yields. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about the kinds of properties that generate the highest levels of yields, the highest yielding properties. And in our experience, and I don't think this is going to come as a huge shock to you, there are 3 kinds of properties that command the highest levels of yield in the market. And these are HMOs, multi-unit freehold blocks, and holiday lets as well. So what I thought would be really useful is if we just talk about each of those property types individually first and foremost, to really kind of give you a deeper understanding about the metrics that sit behind these properties. So HMOs, houses of multiple occupancy. So first of all, just a very quick overview, what is an HMO? So an HMO is a property where you have more than one sort of unrelated tenant living in situ. Now these tenants, you can have, you know, an unlimited number of tenants actually are separate tenants. So it could be just 2 people sharing, and it could be 10, 20 people sharing a property. When we talk about HMOs, people always think about student lets. That's kind of where our minds naturally go, which is absolutely right, because actually some 47% of HMOs are let to tenants. But that means that actually there's a huge chunk of the market, the HMO letting, which are not let to students. Now, HMOs will yield very, very well. And actually, 6.5% is kind of the quoted average of yields on an HMO. But actually, this is versus a standard family let. But actually, in our experience, HMOs can yield far, far more than this. So we've seen yields of 10, even 15% before. So it really depends on the size of the HMO, the location of the HMO, and the number of tenants that you've actually got in place. So generally speaking, the bigger it is, the higher the yield becomes. So a 2-bedroom flat rented to sharers would generally not command as high a yield as a 10-bedroom house, for example, let on a separate AST basis, so every tenant has their own tenancy agreement. So yeah, so 6.5% is kind of the quoted average yield on HMOs. Like I say, I think actually in my experience it's much higher. That's versus an average standard yield of 5.5%. Now, in terms of HMOs, you know, what is it that tenants are looking for? So like I say, we've always, I think, naturally thought of HMOs as, let's be honest about it, grotty student properties. But actually the requirement for these properties has really kind of the expectation is the quality of the property is actually very, very nice these days. So not only for professional sharers, but also for students as well. So actually people are expecting higher end properties. They want, you know, good finishings, good quality, nice and clean, things to be modern. And we'll come on to that in a bit more in a moment. But I think one of the reasons for this is actually the demand for HMO properties for professional tenants is actually growing. So 45% of landlords have actually noticed an increase in demand from young professionals. So more and more young professionals are looking to use house shares essentially as their way to live. HMOs are doing so well that 42% of HMO landlords are actually intending to purchase property in the next 12 months. And this is according to research carried out by Paragon, who are a really fantastic lender. They are very, very good in the HMO space, actually. And they've done a big survey of thousands of landlords, and this is what the results are showing. So if you're in the HMO space, you're really enjoying it, your properties are yielding very well, your risk is spread, because actually if you've got, you know, 5 tenants in place, all on separate tenancies, and 1 tenant vacates, you've still got 4 paying tenants remaining in place, that spreads your risk. So these landlords are really liking it, and they're planning on increasing their portfolio going forwards. Now, in terms of if you are thinking that an HMO and those higher yields could appeal to you, there's some things that's actually just worth knowing about in terms of what tenants are looking for these days. So 56% of tenants actually are looking for higher speed broadband, 53% are looking for ensuite bathrooms, 39% do actually actively seek out larger bedrooms and higher quality furnishing, 35% are looking from working from home facilities, and 28% want outdoor spaces. And actually even 12% are looking to be able to keep pets in their house shares. So just to give you some kind of thoughts about the kinds of things that are really, really important to HMO tenants, the people that you'd be letting the properties to. So we know HMOs are really great, but what about multi-unit freehold blocks? So first of all, what is a multi-unit freehold block, or a MFB as we affectionately refer to them here? So this is where you have a single legal entity, so a single title number essentially, where there's multiple self-contained units within that title. So the obvious example here would be a block of flats. But it could also be a house with a basement flat, self-contained basement flat. It could be a terrace of houses. It could be 3 detached houses all on one single title. So it's just where you can have more than one self-contained living space on one legal title. Now, multi-unit freehold blocks do command higher rents than standard letting properties. 6.2% is the average yield, but again, we can see these increasing. And again, unsurprisingly, the larger the building, the more self-contained the units that you have on the title, the greater the yield tends to become. And these are really popular, again, because you have this kind of mitigated risk in terms of rents coming in. So if you have a block of 5 flats, one family decides to leave the property, you've still got another 4 properties rented out in that building, generating rental income for you. What we've also found with these types of properties is that actually you spread your risk, I think, more so than you would do with an HMO, because each part of the building is self-contained. So you could have in one flat a family, in another flat you could have a couple of young professionals, in the third unit you could even have some students. So it really kind of means that the property has a broader appeal to lots of different types of tenants, which can be really, really attractive to landlords as well. So these properties really do appeal to all different types of tenants, which means they tend to have really strong occupancy rating. Now, I think for both of these types of properties, so HMOs and multi-units, it's probably worth just talking momentarily around the ability to obtain mortgages on these, because we are a mortgage brokerage after all. It would seem remiss not to mention this, at least in passing. So with HMOs, realistically, you can get to 80% loan to value borrowing at the moment, same for multi-unit freehold blocks. With both types of property, actually, what you'll find is there tends to be a classification of small HMOs and multi-unit freeholds, and then larger ones. So anything up to 6 tends to be classed as small, so 6 rooms or 6 units, and anything over 6 tends to be classed as larger. All the lenders who lend on HMOs and multi-units are quite comfortable lending up to 6 rooms. It's when you, or 6 units, it's once you go above that number that you find that the appetite to lend on these properties may diminish slightly. There might be fewer lenders lending on them, and those who do, they might have a slightly higher pricing structure for those larger properties. That's not the case for all lenders, actually. People like Paragon, as an example, have one pricing structure, whether it's a 3-bedroom HMO or a block of 20 self-contained flats. But just to note, there can be a real disparity. Now, if you are thinking about buying either an HMO or a multi-unit, one thing it's just worth knowing is that some lenders will only lend on these types of properties if you come to the table with some level of letting experience. So whether it's I've had one buy-to-let for a couple of years, or I've had one HMO for the last 12 months, but they kind of want you to have varying levels of experience behind you. Now, why is that? So if you have never rented a property out before in your life, and then you take on a block of 10 flats, you go from having no letting experience to suddenly having to manage 10 properties, and that could be a bit of a baptism of fire. For those of you who already have buy-to-lets, you know how these things can sometimes shake out. So from the lenders' perspectives, a lot of them are saying, look, do you know what, it's absolutely fine, we're very happy to finance these, but we need you to cut your teeth first on something a little bit more kind of vanilla, a bit more straightforward. Once you've done that and you've kind of got some experience, come back to us and we'd fund these things. Now, having said that, there are absolutely some lenders who will lend on HMOs and multi-units, particularly the smaller ones, for first-time investors, but you will find that there's fewer of them than there would be otherwise. In terms of parameters, like I said, up to 6 rooms, no problem, or 6 units. But actually, if you're looking at the really lumpy properties, so the large HMOs and multi-units of up to 20 rooms and 20 self-contained units, we can still get these away on buy-to-let pricing. Once you go above 20 rooms, 20 units, then you're moving into the world of commercial lending. So actually, we lend on loads of these. We're doing these all the time. Like I say, once landlords go into HMOs and multi-units, we find they rarely come back to borrowing or buying single straightforward properties, because they just really like the higher yields they command and the spread of risk as well. Okay, so moving on to holiday lets. Now, I was quite sceptical about holiday lets because holiday lets really kind of got going during the COVID years, when actually, even if you could go overseas, the guarantee of your holiday actually taking place, travel restrictions, all the paperwork, people just got put off. So the UK holiday let market had a massive boom, and we saw a lot of investors really pile in. And I did at the time think, gosh, I wonder when things kind of calm down, we're sort of almost back to normal, whether there'll be the same level of demand, or is there going to be a load of people that have bought properties in places that other, holiday let locations they wouldn't ordinarily have invested in, now sat empty or really struggling to fill them. But actually, what's been really interesting is that the UK holiday let market is actually holding incredibly firm. So some 50% of holiday let owners are saying that their bookings are still stronger than ever post-pandemic. So things are still actually doing really, really well. And I did take a moment just to kind of reflect on this and think, well, I wonder why that is. And actually, I experienced this myself. I was recently looking for a place to rent in the Lake District in the summer holidays where we could go with my kids and the dogs. And it is actually really hard to find anywhere that's vacant. These places are really, really booked up and also really expensive. So that kind of really just reinforced this message. Now, I think there's a few reasons why the UK holiday letting market is doing really well still, despite the fact we can now travel pretty much globally very, very freely. And I think the first thing is actually people, having spent some time vacationing in the UK, have actually realised that there's some really beautiful places to go. It's actually quite, a beautiful country when it's not raining, obviously, which is not often. I think secondly, what's happening is that people are now having maybe less big holidays overseas per year, but maybe having just a fortnight in the summer, for example, but are choosing to take a couple of smaller UK breaks and therefore relying on these UK holiday properties. So that market has really grown. So it's the shorter vacations rather than the fortnight ones that I would imagine are really sort of doing really well. And I think the other thing that's really interesting, and I can only sort of relate because a client was saying this to me the other day, a lot of people got dogs in COVID, didn't they? So I think a lot of people are actually kind of quite reticent to leave their dogs behind and stick them in a kennel and jet off to, Spain or something. So actually more people are choosing, because of their little furry friends, to holiday in the UK as well. So So I think all of these things are really underpinning the holiday let market. So look, here's some data for you. So 63% of holiday let owners are planning to grow their portfolio over the next 5 years. That's over half of them are doing it at the moment and thinking this is really great, I'm going to keep on investing. The average yield on holiday lets 10%, so really, really high. Average income from holiday let £24,000. Now, I think let's not detract from the fact that holiday lets are quite labour intensive. You need to be managing these properties. We've all been there. We've been on holiday. We've turned up to our accommodation. It's not clean. There's no towels or whatever it is. And actually, we know it's very, very disheartening when you really look forward to your holiday and you turn up and things are not far from perfect. So I do think that holiday let owners are under a huge amount of pressure and responsibility to ensure that the property is absolutely pristine every single time they relet it, which can be every few nights. So it's very, very labour intensive. But having said that, you know, you can reap the rewards because the yields are so good. Now, what's interesting, 24% of people surveyed, and this was from Sykes Holiday Letting, actually of people running properties through the Sykes books, 24% of these people actually used to run the property as a holiday let, a buy-to-let rather, on normal ASTs, but have chosen to use the holiday let route and have actually stuck with it. And 27% of holiday letters, so holiday makers, are now more likely to rebook properties. So what this tells us is that actually people in the UK, they find a property in the UK when they holiday, they really like it, they're actually very inclined to rebook rather than sort of thinking, oh, I have to keep finding somewhere new to stay. People just like the familiarity of going back to the same place because it's comfortable, because it works, because they know they've had a really great time. In addition to the yields on holiday lets, incidentally, I think there is actually a couple of other things to just keep in mind about why they're quite attractive to people. So first of all, there are potentially some tax efficiencies. So the way that holiday let income is taxed is different to normal buy-to-let. So holiday let income doesn't fall under the same remit of Section 24. And therefore, for some people, particularly those who are high rate taxpayers, holiday letting can be a much more tax efficient way to do things. Now, in addition to that, actually, the other thing that's been really interesting and why I think the market has done really well is because we've now got international travellers coming back to the UK. That took longer to filter through. So during the COVID years, it was all people in the UK going on holiday in the UK, but now what we're seeing is a real resurgence of people coming from overseas and using the UK as a base to travel around, not just the UK, but actually as a base to travel and explore Europe as well. So doing really, really well in the holiday let space, and certainly something that we're still seeing lots of our clients looking to get into. Okay, now we're just going to talk about the UK's highest rental yields. So where are they and why location is so important? So what you're going to see here is a table which really just talks you through some of the hotspots in terms of both rental growth and then average yields as well. So I think it's fair to say that throughout the UK, I mean, rental yields have increased pretty much everywhere, but some regions have really outperformed others. So Manchester at 15.6% growth in the last 12 months is a real kind of leader in terms of growth of yields. However, one number on here that I just want to point out to you is the London growth of 17%. Now, while that sounds on the face of it absolutely amazing, let's not take away from the fact that London got really hard hit during the pandemic when loads of people left the cities to go and, you know, live with families or rent in sort of greener spaces. So London did get absolutely hammered during COVID. So the fact that now people have come back to work, we've all heard of places like Google saying, you know, no more working from home, everyone has to come back to the office. There's been a real surge of people coming back to the city, and that's why I think London has seen a particularly strong growth over the last 12 months. But let's look at yields for a moment. So the column now on the right hand side. So look, if you're really, really looking for yields, strong yields, then Newcastle is the place to be, closely followed by Manchester. And there's lots of variations here, but I think really what you can see is there are certain areas which command higher yields than others. And moving on to that, really just talking a bit more about locations. So I don't think it's become as a huge shock when I say that different locations command different or better rental yields. And I think typically people have always kind of turned their attentions when they're thinking about yields to university towns and large cities. But actually, I just wanted to share something that I've found really interesting. So we see quite a few of our clients who focus not just on those areas, because they are great areas, but also properties which are close to airports and also hospitals. Now, the reason these two types of infrastructure are quite good for landlords is because, generally speaking, people that work at these places don't tend to be there permanently, so they can often be quite kind of transient's probably too loose, but you know, they're quite temporary. So actually there's a really strong demand for those kinds of areas as well. So I think realistically, it's not just about picking cities or certain towns, it's also about within those locations being very, very kind of considered and researched in terms of the demand for rental in that particular area. Okay, now moving on to how to optimise your current property investments. And we've got two really good things to talk about. So refurbishment to let, which is one of my favourites, and then also EPC improvements. Now, refurb to let. So this is more in relation to how you may want to, you can use it for existing properties, but also new properties that you want to acquire. So we are definitely seeing an upturn in number of investors who are looking to buy property, do work to it. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Some people are saying, I'm definitely going to sell. Some people are saying, I want to rent it. And some people are, and most of them actually saying, I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do with this, actually. I'm going to really see how the market's holding up once I finish the refurbishment projects. They want options in terms of what to do. So what is refurb to let? So refurb to let is a financing product which is available, which will essentially allow you to acquire a property which is not mortgageable in its current condition and make it mortgageable, and then allow you to segue or exit onto a pre-underwritten buy-to-let mortgage. So essentially it's with one lender, it all sits in-house, there's a bridging loan to start you off to acquire the property, get the works done, and then you move seamlessly onto a buy-to-let mortgage at the back end. Now, these are really, really popular with landlords. So we had these pre-COVID, this kind of offering went away during COVID. It's now come back again. So I'll tell you why people loved it previously, and nothing has changed actually. When people buy a property that needs work doing to it, and we say to them, you're going to have to take a bridging loan, people get really, really worried about this. Now, bridging finance actually is nothing to be fearful of these days. I know it's got a really bad reputation from many, many years ago, but actually bridging finance is available from lots of really reputable institutions, for example, One Savings Bank and Shawbrook Bank as well. But still, nonetheless, a lot of people are like, God, well, what if I take a bridging loan and I can't sell the property and I can't refinance, and I'm stuck paying bridging rates for the foreseeable future? That's really, really expensive, and it makes people really anxious. So what this product does is it takes away those concerns. So you have a pre-underwritten, actually a mortgage offer at the point of completion of the purchase. So I'll tell you a bit more how it works, and this will kind of make it a bit clearer. So you apply for the mortgage and the bridging loan at the same time. The valuer goes out and says, yeah, based on the current condition, this is what the property is worth, and the lender will lend up to 75% of the purchase price as a bridge. At the same time, the valuer has in their hands a proposed schedule of works that you would have put together, letting them know what changes you're going to make to the property. And the valuer will look through this and say, yeah, absolutely, I agree that if you do all these things to this property, at the end of it, the property is A, going to be lettable, most importantly, and B, I think it's going to be worth an enhanced value of X. With all this information from the valuer, the lender then produces two mortgage offers, one at 75% loan to value up to 75%, depending on how much you want, to acquire the property, but a second offer which can take you up to 75% of the end value on a long-term buy-to-let mortgage. So you've got the kind of exit sorted from the off. So in real terms, what happens? So you buy the property, you do your works on the bridging loan, valuer will need to go back out before you can switch to the buy-to-let mortgage. He'll go out and say, yeah, based on what you said you were going to do, yeah, I can see you've done all these things, tick, 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 goes back to the lender, lets them know that's been done. Lender says, lovely, that's amazing, we'll move you onto the buy-to-let mortgage and we can release capital to bring you up to 75% of the end value now, if that's what you want to do. So really, really nice product, which takes away a lot of the kind of anxiety about taking on these kinds of projects. Now, is it all roses? What's the pros and cons? So the pros of this are guaranteed exit, takes away the uncertainty. Also, it's going to save you a bunch of money on fees because it's one valuation, one reinspection. So that's a reinspection fee is only about £150 rather than a valuation for bridge and a valuation for a full remortgage. Also, because the legal charge is already with the lender, the legal work when you move across the buy-to-let mortgage is very small, so you're going to save some money there. The downside to this, or potential downside to it, is that actually the rate that you exit onto, the long-term buy-to-let rate, isn't necessarily the lowest on the market. So it could be that you can get better buy-to-let rates elsewhere. So this can be the kind of the downside of this arrangement. So when people come to us and they found a property they want to buy and do up either to rent or to sell on, what we will do is cost up two options. One, the refurb to let option, and then the second one would be doing a bridging loan and then remortgaging onto a separate buy to let mortgage, and we'll cost that all out to see how it works. Now, generally speaking, the refurb to let product tends to come out on top, but not always. So that's part of the work we'll be doing to you as a service for looking at this. So like I say, it's a really, really popular product, and we've done loads of these in the past, and we've never had any problems in terms of the exit. We've never had the lender do a U-turn. It's always worked really, really well. And actually, once clients have done one of these, they tend to come back from time and time again. They don't then sort of revert back to bridging finance. Now, is this going to be appropriate if you want to do some work against your own property? Yeah, absolutely. You can do that, no problem. If you were thinking about upgrading one of your existing properties, then absolutely you could use product. I'm not sure that would necessarily be the right way of doing it. And again, we'd need to do the maths for you, but it would be on the table. These refurb to let products are designed for small improvements. Okay, so if you're going to start knocking down walls, converting things, anything that requires real building regs or planning, that's not what these are for. If you want to go into kind of the more heavy refurbishment stuff, then you would definitely be looking at a bridge and then a remortgage. So again, we would cost it all out for you if that was something that would be of interest. Okay, now I just want to talk a bit about EPCs, because this is something which I think is on landlords' minds at the moment, actually. So we know that the proposal is that all buy-to-let properties which are going to be relet in 2025 will need to have an EPC rating of C or above unless you have an exemption. How likely is this to actually come into play? So look, we're kind of end of Q1 2023, we're running out of time. We think a mortgage business is probably going to get pushed out a bit because there just isn't enough time now to kind of get this in place. We could be wrong, but that's our kind of thoughts on where we are with things. But we do think it will come in nonetheless at some point in the future. Now, as well as kind of being an overarching kind of level of anxiety, I think, for those landlords whose properties aren't EPC rating of Cs. And the reason it's causing anxiety is because at the moment there's nothing's finalised. We don't know about exemptions, we don't know about timeframes, we don't know about the costs involved. It's just all these kind of things that are hanging around the edges. There's also a big question mark over kind of EPC certificates and the way that properties are assessed anyway at the moment. So it just isn't very nice for landlords. So I think what most of our clients are doing is saying, look, you know what, if the property's rented out, I'm just going to leave it. I'm just going to leave it and see what happens. And if the tenant moves out, if I can do some quick changes to drive up the EPC a bit, then amazing. But I'm not going to throw loads of money at this right now because I could end up spending a bunch of money. They're going to change the EPC assessment kind of methodology, or indeed this doesn't ever come into play and I've spent loads of money unnecessarily. So a lot of landlords are just sitting on their hands. Now, the thing that I think that's absolutely fine, by the way. I'm doing the same thing for one of my buy-to-let, so don't worry. But I think one of the biggest concerns that I have, and we saw this happen with the previous EPC requirements when things had to be a rating of E or above, is that a lot of landlords did really just sit on this and largely ignore it. So they have a property, they kind of missed the first deadline of needing to relet the property because the property was tenanted. Then that tenant moves out, they then need to do the works to the property. But by that point, the boat has already sailed. The property is then unlettable and therefore unmortgageable. So I think you need to be quite wise in terms of the planning around your timings on this. And I appreciate this will become clearer as we get the kind of official announcement on dates, but also making sure you've got the finances in place to pay for the changes. There's been loads of kind of research carried out. And so generally speaking, the landlords who were surveyed was kind of coming back saying, yeah, do you know what, I'm prepared to spend £3,000 on my green improvements. I think that's where I'm kind of willing to go to. The average cost to bring a property up from a D to a C is over £10,000. So there's a big disparity between what people are prepared to pay and, you know, kind of, I guess, think they will have to pay and actually what the likely cost is going to be. So £7,000 disparity there, which is huge. Now, interestingly, the kind of rumours that have been mooted is that the EPC exemption level is going to sit at £10,000. So there could be quite a lot of landlords who are finding themselves short. So if you've got 3 properties which need EPC ratings that are going to cost you £10,000 a go, suddenly you're going to have to find £30,000, which is not the sort of money that most of us are keeping under, you know, our floorboards. So just really, I think for you guys, what you need to start be thinking about is if you're doing a remortgage as an example and you're thinking, I'm not going to raise any capital at the moment, maybe just have a think about, hang on a minute, I could have quite a lumpy bill coming up for these green changes. So how am I going to do that? How am I going to pay for it? Is it actually worth me taking a little bit of money out of the property now, just so I've got the means to pay for it? Incidentally, when the surveys have been done in terms of how landlords are going to pay for these, I think it was like 20% of landlords actually had the cash ready to go. Everyone else was kind of coming back saying, I'm going to borrow it, I don't know how I'm going to pay for it, I'll worry about it later. So just to kind of get your minds in the right zone. Now, when we talk about EPCs, I think this is one of those things where landlords are like, oh, I've got another thing that's been put on us. And it does feel like that. You know, I mean, like I say, I've got a property which I'm sort of scratching my head and how on earth I'm going to get it over the line in terms of a C rating. But actually, there are some good things to come out of having a greener property. So the first thing is that lenders are really looking to champion this. So they're bringing out what's called green mortgages. So a green mortgage is where the lender will give you a slightly lower interest rate if your property is a C rating or above. Now, is it life-changing amounts of money? No, not at the moment, actually. So generally speaking, you'll save circa 0.1% on the interest rate. But actually, 0.1% of a mortgage over 25 years can be a really large savings and not to be sniffed at. And actually, you could find that over time, those savings will pay for the upgrades in themselves. Now, another thing that's really great about having greener properties is the lower running costs. So for those of you who have HMOs where you're paying the bills, this could be a real cost-saving exercise for you. But not only is it good for those guys, but also it's good for those of you whose tenants are paying their own gas and electric. Indeed, there's been some research that's been carried out which tells us that greener properties are more attractive to tenants and also can command higher levels of rent. So again, you could be able to just recoup your costs over time there. And also just kind of separately to that, properties which have greener credentials actually are more appealing to buyers as well, because obviously people who are buying a house to live in also want to be mindful about their running costs as well. So I think while these large outlays on green improvements to begin with feel incredibly expensive and unappealing, actually if we look at the potential long game in terms of benefits, you could actually find that ultimately you end up better off for it in the round. And that's our presentation. So I really hope you found that helpful and it kind of did what it said in the tin to help give you kind of thinking about different ways to really maximise your rental income and your yields. There are lots of different other ways of doing this as well. So I think really the message from us would be very much, you know, if you are thinking about embarking on a project or you want some more ideas, do give us a call. We are speaking to landlords every single day, so we hear what's going on, we're hearing the ideas. And I find that landlords actually are a really agile bunch. You know, landlords impress me every single day in terms of if the market turns against them, they find a solution to it. But also landlords are very sharing. So landlords like to are very, very good at sharing ideas with each other in terms of what they're doing to kind of improve yields, drive down costs, all these kinds of things. So I'm sure that our clients will be very, very happy that we're kind of taking on what they're telling us and sharing it with you as well. If you do have any questions, please do drop us a line, and you can do that in multiple ways. So you can email us inquiry@mortgagesforbusiness.co.uk, either in relation to anything we've discussed today, but also more broadly, you can give us a call. We love chatting to people, so give us a ring, 0345 345 6788, or you can go on our website. Not only is there an abundance of information, but there's also an online chat facility. So during working hours, you can go on and have a little kind of online chat with us. It's not a robot, you're coming straight through to a person. So yeah, very welcome to make contact any of those ways. Thank you again. If you've got any suggestions for our next webinar, which we'll be holding in the next sort of 3 months time, we'd love to hear from you as well. Thank you for listening to us, and yeah, catch you next time.